All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the OpenWater webinar series, event series, virtual event series. My name is Chris Albrecht. I am your host here with OpenWater. And I have been so excited about this ever since I started reading your book. But I have as my very special guest today, Mr. Wagner James Au. I'm going to be referring to him as James throughout, just so you don't get confused. I am paying attention. He gave you a little shaka there, show you that everything's all right. I am so excited to talk with you today, James, because you have
Me
written a
too.
book that everybody. Oh, thank you. Welcome. Sorry, I should say welcome. Hey, James,
Hey,
welcome. Thanks for being here.
good to be here. How's it going?
You have written this book. Let's see if I can get it in
Yes.
focus. Making a Metaverse That Matters. It's sort of backwards in the mirroring there. Hopefully it'll come out all right there. Um, that's all about the metaverse. You
Yeah,
and I worked together at GigaOM many years ago, but you've
we
been
did.
in the metaverse space since when? Like for how long? Like almost since the
2003.
beginning,
Yeah,
2003. Like
yeah,
it's crazy.
yeah, yeah. When all the metaverse hype started around 2020, I was kind of pulling my hair out because the press was sort of treating it as if Mark Zuckerberg invented it, and and then they're sort of assuming that he's building the metaverse. But yeah, I helped launch Second Life from Linden Lab, and that was actually the first attempt to build a metaverse to reach mainstream awareness. And yeah, that was 2003.
Yeah. So, needless to say, you have been knee deep in this space for a long time. This is actually your second book, right? Your first one was on
Third, yeah,
third. Okay.
yeah, first one's called Making the Making of Second Life, and so
Uh-huh.
that was about my experiences working for Linden Lab as their embedded journalist. So I was a embedded avatar in the virtual world of Second Life, going around interviewing people about the emerging culture that was already taking shape even in early 2003. And then I wrote a book about game design, and then yeah, this one, Making a Metaverse That Matters, trying to
It's
crystallize 20 years of what I've learned.
just in that, just as a quick aside, it's funny whenever uh you younger kids or whomever in like college or high school or ever talk about like, oh, what jobs should I look for, whatever, like you just never know what jobs
Yeah,
are going to be. You just stay open because you never know, because your job was literally to be an embedded reporter in a virtual world and
yeah,
unearth stories and write about them. Like
yeah,
that's such
yeah,
I mean, it's not a crazy notion, but back when you and I were in college, you'd be like, well, what do you mean? That's not a
yeah.
job. That doesn't exist.
Which, and it's really interesting. It's now a kind of full-time job for a lot of people, usually through YouTube or Twitch, where
Yeah.
they're basically doing this stuff. Like I talk about this one emerging metaverse platform called VR Chat, and there's this guy named Searmore, and he does basically embedded journalism within VR Chat. And he interviews people, and he has over 1 million followers on YouTube, so he's making a good living just
Wow.
interviewing people, and he gets really interesting interviews. There's a lot of veterans who are recovering from PTSD in virtual worlds, and so he'll do really in-depth interviews of people's experiences in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they're really powerful. It's actual real journalism. It's just that it happens to be in a virtual world space.
That's crazy. So let's talk about the virtual world space, right?
Yeah,
So one of the first things you do in your book, Making a Metaverse That Matters, um, is that you provide a definition, your
yeah.
definition of a metaverse. Why did you feel, give us what that definition is and tell us why you felt the need to create one.
Yeah, so the metaverse is a vast, immersive virtual world, accessible simultaneously by millions of people through highly customizable avatars and powerful content creation tools. And it's linked to the real world economy and external technology. In other words, the content you create in the virtual world, you can actually sell and make a living through real dollars. And so I start that definition right from the beginning because, like I mentioned about pulling my hair out since 2020, a lot of the coverage was, well, the metaverse is whatever Zuckerberg says it is. Or a lot of people say, well, it's sort of inspired by a science fiction book, but we're not really sure what it is. And so I went back to the beginning and said, no, actually, the all of the metaverse platform leaders right now were directly inspired by Snow Crash, because Neal Stephenson, he's a working programmer, he actually thought through how to create a virtual world, kind of thinking about what would a version of the internet be that would be as popular as television, because this is in early 90s before the World Wide Web was really mainstream. And so he conceived this idea, but he worked with a lot of technologists about it. I even mentioned in the chapter, he was talking with an early VR company about actually building it in the early 90s. And so Philip Rosedale, the founder of Second Life, was directly inspired by it. Tim Sweeney of Epic Games, directly inspired by it. Dave Bazuski of Roblox was directly inspired by what was depicted in the novel. So I said, instead of kind of creating all these vague definitions, let's go back to what was described in very particular detail in the novel, because that directly influenced all these successful platforms.
It's funny because you mentioned in the book, right? Because I remember reading Snow Crash back in like 1993
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
at the time, or no, actually, it was probably like 1995. Uh, because at the time there were businesses. I remember people like anecdotally saying like, "This is our business plan," and they would
Yeah.
put down Snow Crash as a book,
Yeah.
right? And because in it, it's a very colorful, like imaginative, especially at the time. Like you have an avatar, and you're walking
Mm-hmm.
through, and there are sword fights, and there are nightclubs, and there are all kinds of things. But what's interesting is that, um, as you write in the book, like telling somebody about Snow Crash today or Neal Stephenson today, like a younger programmer or whatever, would be like mentioning Nirvana to somebody, right? Like it is so long ago that
Yeah.
it's no, while it was totemic at the beginning, it's probably not as much anymore. It's just sort of embedded and imbued in everything that's coming out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of amazing, especially from reporters. It's like, you're a tech reporter, you should probably read this very influential novel. It's still a really fun, cool novel. But yeah, usually the reference you'll hear more recently is Ready Player One.
Yeah.
And I don't think it really added much to the metaverse concept in Snow Crash. It kind of made it more of a single shard game. In other words, a
Yeah.
giant game with all kinds of variations of the game. But yeah, I hope we can get back to using Snow Crash as a reference, because it actually is working.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this because since we've been talking about the metaverse,
Hmm.
right, since the early 90s with this, and it still blows my mind that he was trying to build it back in 1990 something. Like I think
Yeah,
back to,
92.
you know, like Doom and the graphic, you know what I mean? And
Exactly.
like sort of like, oh, you would be what would that have looked like on a giant CRT monitor? Uh, you know, um, but I want to the metaverse is always, and it seems like it still is like an almost there proposition. Like it's just around the corner. And it seems like it's been that
Hmm.
way for a long time. So I'm wondering if you could tell people watching right now, why should they care about it?
Well, so really, going with the definition that I started with, vast immersive virtual world, content creation tools, etc. Uh, Roblox qualifies for the basic outline of that definition. Fortnite qualifies. Another one called Rec Room, VR chat I mentioned. There's at least 10 or so platforms that are very popular. And if you add them up together, it's well over 500 million users. Roblox alone, I just blogged about that on my blog, has 350 million monthly active users. So the user base of Roblox alone is larger than the entire United States population. And so it's very active. And if you follow what Roblox is doing, they're emerging more and more the whole metaverse idea. Like, for example, they added a telephony feature where you can actually call anyone from within Roblox, and it's 350 million people, so it's quite a lot of people. So it's mostly Generation Z. So what I would say is that's going to shape what they're doing in Roblox and other platforms, is going to shape what the internet looks like in 10, 20 years.
Yeah, that's, and if you think about sort of some of the big things that I think people probably point to are like the Travis Scott concert in
Oh
Fortnite,
yeah.
right? Where you have uh, just, thousands of people
No, it's
simultaneously
like 12
watching.
million. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well,
I
yeah,
vastly.
it was a kind of recorded thing, but yeah, all 12 was over 12 million. So
Yeah. I mean,
larger than he could reach in the real world.
yeah, that's not nothing. That's crazy to think about. And
Yeah.
so I think your point is a good one, which is like, this is where it's at now, but this is, portending what can come down the road, which is, so let's talk about Fortnite and Roblox, right? Because as people work for, Matthew Ball has written a lot about metaverse stuff, right?
Yeah.
You've written a lot about metaverse stuff, right? And everybody seems to kind of, as soon as you talk about metaverse, people go like, oh, Fortnite, Roblox, right?
Hmm.
And those exist sort of on their own separate islands. But how do
Yeah,
those fit? Because I think people think of Fortnite mainly as a game, right?
yeah.
Something that their children probably spend an inordinate amount of time, probably less anymore. But like, how do those fit into sort of the overall picture or industry of the metaverse?
Yeah, well, so like you're saying, there's these kind of many very large, but they're sort of separate, sort of walled gardens. And so what kind of people who want to build real life applications on top of these platforms are frustrated by is you end up in multiple walled gardens. For example, marketing shows a lot of promise. Real world marketing of brands like Nike or Chipotle. You can create different marketing experiences within Fortnite, Roblox, etc. But they're all separate, so you kind of have to repeat all of them. And so, like one of the things that people talk about a lot is some level of interoperability between these platforms. I think, and I get into this in the book because interoperability people try to apply a web model to it, where it's like, well, all web pages are interoperable, so shouldn't metaverse platforms all be interoperable? And I come down on saying, no, I think as long as you are able to interoperate your user community, so you can bring your friends with you to different experiences, I think that's enough. That's an MVP for the next 5-10 years, let's say. But yeah, I think that will be the next step to really take it to the next level, where that would help enforce the awareness that there's just, upwards of 1 billion people in these things, and there's a way to reach them across many platforms if we have some level of interoperability like that.
In the book you point out, right, like it's less about, because you, when people talk about metaverses, right, they're like, well, in an idealized fashion, I could have my magic sword in this game and I could carry that sword into the other game, right? And what
Yeah,
you argue is like that, don't worry about the sword, just
yeah,
it's
yeah,
more about your identity and how you present yourself in your virtual world and how you feel safe and how you express your identity.
right.
It's more of a cosmetic thing than it is like an item that has power.
Yeah, well, also identity and community, and I think a lot of times that gets missed. That people find value in metaverse platforms right now. They meet people from all over the world. Literally, I mean, there's stories in the book about this, stories in my blog where people end up getting married in real life and become fast friends or business partners, and they meet people in these metaverse platforms are very large, so you have a chance to meet a diverse range of people that you would not meet in real life. Like, for example, a lot of connections between age groups, like people in their 50s and 60s who are good friends with people in their 20s because of this kind of shared immersive experience. So that's really powerful. Yeah, the content aspect. Well, we almost get to a philosophical question of is an item valuable if it's not valuable to the community that you have it in. So if you take a virtual, like you said, magic sword, it could be seen as valuable in one community, but if you take it to another platform, people are just going to go, what is that? I mean, and that's even that's
Stop
putting
hitting
it,
me with that.
yeah. And that's even putting aside the technical challenges of, there's different file types and all that physics. So yeah, I think it's about maintaining and enforcing and expanding the user community.
So let's talk about communities for a second. And one that turns out to be a rather tenacious one is that of Second Life. As you mentioned earlier, you were an embedded reporter in Second Life.
Yeah.
Some people may not remember. Can you refresh people's memory as to what Second Life was and
Yeah.
sort of how it exists today?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, like I mentioned, it was really the first attempt to build something like the metaverse. It was also inspired by Burning Man, of all things, of Philip Rosedale, the founder of it, kind of had that in mind. And then his co-founder Corey Andraka also kind of building a open simulated world. But because of this user generated content and the fact that people could make money, and it was the first platform where that sort of hit mainstream awareness that, oh, you can make a living creating virtual content. I mean, now it's kind of commonplace, but it was sort of inspired the first wave of excitement. And Second Life ended up on the cover of Business Week, and then other big publications started depicting it as the next wave of the internet. Like I mentioned in the book, a story with there's a panel at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco, really high-end, big thinker meeting, and the one of the VPs of Second Life is there talking about it, and everyone's treating it like this is the next thing. And then at the same table at the very end is some college kid named Zuckerberg. And they're kind of like, well, so do you want an avatar, Zuckerberg? And he says he might want to have an avatar like Cher. But anyway, it had that really runaway media awareness. And so a lot of people think of it from the TV show The Office, because there was a whole episode where Jim and Dwight end up playing around in Second Life. So yeah, it really got that runaway traction in terms of awareness. What happened was really a case study for, I think, any entrepreneur and people running a business. Is they couldn't get past the kind of the first time user experience and the branding, so that they had literally tens of millions of people reading about it or seeing it on The Office or whatever. They tried to create an account, but because they really didn't decide what the platform was, it hovered between being a game and being the 3D internet, and they really kind of didn't decide what the product fit would be. And so 99% of people just got too confused and overwhelmed and left. The irony is, Second Life actually is as popular, roughly as popular now as it was back in the Office days. It's about 500,000 monthly active users, very profitable for Linden Lab, the company, which is now owned by a larger holding company. But yeah, upwards of maybe 20, 40 million in pure profit it makes every year, just because the user community is very active, and the content in the marketplace is it's like roughly $500 million worth
When you say
that is
active,
bought.
what are these active? What are they doing? What are they
Yeah.
actively doing?
Well, it's really interesting. So yeah, it splits up roughly into large buckets of kind of like the Sims games,
Mhm.
kind of like a Sims, like a role play fashion sort of experience. And then sort of layered on that, sort of like a Grand Theft Auto, but NC-17 rated Grand Theft Auto online experience. So there's a lot of kind of that role play, like hot cars, hot babes, going to clubs, that kind of thing. And then there's a lot of interesting other smaller communities. Like there's a large post-apocalyptic community. So there's this area called the Wasteland, for example, and it looks like Mad Max. And then there's a lot of steampunk, and there's communities like furries, who are kind of the anthropomorphic cartoon animals that's also very popular. I always tell people like the furries are kind of the Amish of the internet. Like they're sort of odd, but they tend to be the people that are working in your servers in the back of any company, because they're kind of the early adopters of tech. But yeah, so there's all these interesting little niche communities within Second Life. There's even an art community, a live music community that's very strong. So yeah, it's pretty thriving in that way.
And so let's say I create a Second Life account, right?
Yeah,
What struck me, just to put a pin in it, like a button on it, is the sheer number of churn that you described when Second Life first came out. Like people got to basically the intro screen, like
yeah,
everybody was downloading it. They'd get to the intro screen and be like, "I'm out. I can't.
yeah,
I can't do this."
yeah,
Which is just really a good, to your point, like a case study for people trying to create an on ramp onto your product. So I
yeah,
download Second Life. I go in. I create my steampunk outfit, or you know what I
yeah,
mean, or whatever choices I have, and then I
yeah,
just walk around. Are there? I mean, you mentioned like concerts that happen there,
yeah.
like, or what am I doing to meet others?
Well, that's been the frustration that exists to this day. People, like, if you ask me, I say, well, meet me. I will meet you. Here's my avatar name. It's Hamlet Au. Let's go in at the same time, and I'll take you around to some places and introduce you to some people. That's really the best way to do things, because if you end up going in fresh, you're going to have to end up like going through the search, the search function, looking, okay, what's popular, and you can go to places, but it's like, it's like a city for the first time. If you go to Los Angeles by
Yeah.
yourself, you're going to be overwhelmed by the choices. If you have a friend there, it definitely helps. And it's really the same thing. And I say that's part of the reason you do need some kind of game experience in the beginning, because, most people don't want to show up in a city for the first time and say, "Hey, I'm new here," and start meeting people. You want some kind of, quest system where you're exploring the world and you learn as you go, and then you start meeting people along the way. But yeah, you want that so people don't get overwhelmed. It's a challenge. And I mentioned the branding challenges, like even calling it Second Life, it's sort of implying, well, here's what you can do that you've always dreamed of doing in real life. And you can create a whole new identity for yourself. But the problem is, I think most people in real life, they haven't decided what they are in their first life yet.
Yeah.
So they're like, I don't even know who I am really there now. But and then you're telling me to make some whole other character.
Let's talk for a second, because one of the things that you mentioned about Second Life is that people could make actual money. Like it
Yeah,
was very early on in the ability to translate digital goods into, let's just call them dollars, for lack of a
yeah,
better term,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And maybe talk a little bit about how people did and do make money in Second Life. And then I want to get to a bigger question, is whether or not introducing economics into a metaverse is a good idea or a bad idea.
Yeah. So the largest market in Second Life is probably the fashion, broadly defined as avatar customization. So like so there's someone who does customized feet, and she's making upwards of six figures in Second Life. I wrote about in the book. Her name's Gizem Mishi. She was a college kid in Turkey, and she realized she could start selling her fashion in Second Life while she was in Turkey, and she, within a few years, was making millions of dollars. And now she has her own company in North Carolina, and she expanded to Roblox and some other platforms. I mean, she has a whole successful business empire now. But yeah, so fashion is the main thing. There's all these other content, like there's a market for wedding planners in Second Life, where like you would do in real life, because there's a lot of virtual weddings. So you need someone to help plan the scene, and uh, you know make it really pretty, and get a DJ and so on. So that's a real time or a full time job for a lot of people in Second Life. And so yeah, a lot of the economy is that way. That's kind of typical within other platforms like Roblox and VR chat and so on. Is a lot of a large market for content, like for customizable content, and then also customizable experiences, like within more in Roblox and VR chat. You can go into a whole game world from within the platform, and then you can pay. You can buy, like there's in-app purchases, so to speak, even though it's within the platform. And then so the question of whether it's a good idea to introduce an economy, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is you need to introduce it very carefully, because what you want before launching an economy is you want people there who enjoy being there for its own sake. You want kind of that sense of a gift economy, and people who enjoy using the creation tools, because really more than anything, they're going to be creating content within the tools, or sometimes there's an SDK. But you want to really encourage people to do that for kind of the social reward of bringing something beautiful into this community. And then only after that really gains traction, then you can slowly add on monetization tools, like VR chat has been around since I think 2018, and it's only last year they started adding some options to be able to subscribe to different people, like Patreon and so on. So yeah, it's a matter of making sure you already have that ecosystem before adding it on. We've seen the opposite happen, like a lot of the so-called Web3 metaverse platforms, like the Sandbox and Decentraland. They started with the whole, you can make a lot of money in here if you get in early, and there's hardly anyone in them, because that's kind of all the only reason they're there is they're there to make a speculative killing. So there's little or no community.
Yeah, I think about like when things become popular, people want to make money off it, right? And even in Second Life, they had speculators come in,
Oh
right,
yeah.
buying up real estate, digital real estate. And and then it seemed like that also contributed to its downfall, because it's then, to your point, it's like it's about the money, it's not about the community or the experience.
Yeah, well, it changed the culture. Like I said, it's still successful, but definitely the early community of, like, it was more focused on art and really amazing content creation and community experiences that still exists, but it's really overshadowed by that kind of Sims meets Barbie meets Grand Theft Auto kind of wildness that is what it's mostly popular for.
Yeah. I want to make sure if you have a question, please feel free in the audience to submit it and I will read it here. But I have a couple more questions for you, James, which is one, when you think of metaverse, you probably think of like whoop, wearing the headset, right? Having the thing. But
Yeah.
is that required to enjoy the metaverse? Does it have to be like on a head mounted display, or what is it? What is the form factor like?
Absolutely, you do not need a VR headset, and hopefully, that's one of the big takeaways from my book. I'm going to excerpt a part of this in VentureBeat. Hopefully, this week or next is Neal Stephenson. Very soon after his novel came out, played Doom, like you mentioned, and he realized, oh, this is a 3D experience. I don't really need a VR headset. Um, and even in the book, it's kind of implied that you don't really need a VR headset all the time. There's kind of like almost like a phone terminal or like a phone booth sort of experience. But anyway, um, it is it is a huge myth that persists, and it's incredibly enforced by Meta that you need a VR headset or that the metaverse should be a VR facing. And I explore in the book the fact that Dana Boyd, who is a top researcher at Microsoft, she pointed out when Meta, Facebook at the time, got into VR, she said, I did research on this, and there is a strong propensity for females to get nauseous in VR.
Hmm.
And she warned people of that, wrote an essay about it, and then I talked to multiple people at Meta, including John Carmack, who's a CTO for a while of the VR side. I said, well, did you even research this this report and also the subsequent reports that have validated that a large propensity of females tend to get nauseous in VR, and it might even be hormonally based. That was a really interesting thing she found. Dana was with trans people when they were taking male hormones, it actually changed their ability to process 3D content in their brain.
Hmm.
So there might be a hormonal component that's not addressable by technology. Yeah, I asked multiple people at Meta. I didn't get a good answer. As far as I can tell, they have not researched it. In fact, Corey Andraka, the co-founder of Second Life, he ended up going to Meta. He helped launch the mobile app for Facebook. And then after that, Zuckerberg got him to say, well, we'll find the next big thing. And Corey is the one who found the Oculus Kickstarter and connected Zuckerberg to Palmer Luckey and those guys and got Zuckerberg to acquire it. But I asked Corey, so, well, do you know of anyone at Meta researching this? And he's like, nope, I don't. But it's definitely an issue. We should spend money on it. So that's been a huge problem. And yeah, it doesn't get enough coverage. You talk to VR experts like Avi Bar-Zeev, who I mentioned in the book. He led design on Apple Vision Pro, or Jeremy Bailenson of Stanford, who's very influential on all this. And he said, yeah, that's an issue. And it's sort of like the experts know this is an issue, and Meta and other VR companies, even Apple Vision Pro to a certain extent, they're not acknowledging that it could be half the population has a strong propensity to throw up using these things. So, please put the brakes on until we do research on this. But really, like I said, you don't need, for a full 3D immersive experience, you don't need headset. You can, even a mobile phone. That's, primarily how people access Roblox and Fortnite and so on, is you get enough of a 3D experience that way. And it's enough to feel immersive, that kind of you are there quality of looking at your avatar that you control. It's enough even, yeah, on a mobile phone or a laptop. So hopefully that's what we think about, is like VR is good as a option, but you don't want to make it the only option.
Let's talk about the Apple Vision Pro for a second. It made a
Yeah.
big splash last month. Everybody was either saying, heralding it as the future of computing, or saying, it's a $4,000, Gen 1 VR headset, right?
Yeah.
How do you think Apple's entrance, at least with what they showed off with the Vision Pro, do you think that will impact sort of the metaverse world at all? And if so, how?
Well, it already is, in the sense that it revived interest in the metaverse, and they actually, Apple one of the first developers they announced as they're working with is Rec Room. And I mentioned Rec Room, it's one of the bigger metaverse platforms, probably about 20 million people. And so they're creating an app for the Vision Pro. So that's going to be one of the apps that appears on the market. So, people who would like a VR experience, they can use a metaverse platform like Rec Room. So it's going to affect it that way, and just drive interest in general. The way I think of the Vision Pro and the way they even name it, they call it the Vision Pro, with the idea that, as far as I can tell, they're going to market it to people mainly who are power content creators. If you go into a startup now, and you see the programmers and the graphic designers and so on, they'll typically have 3 or 4 screens on their desk because they're running code here and they're watching it play out on that screen. So with a Vision Pro, you can put all those screens in the headset. So, it's $3,500, but if you get a Mac Pro, desktop, that's going to be $6,000. So it's actually seen that way, it's a good deal. So I think they're going to target that market definitely for the next 5 years, probably 10 years. And then if they see traction that continues, then then they might expand it to be more of a consumer product. But I think they'd be happy making it just a popular niche like the Mac Pro. I think that's like 5% of their market or so. You think of iPhone, but there's still, graphic designers and so on who really consider, Apple as the product they're going to get. So that could be where it has, but they're really smart. Apple's really smart on targeting that niche market as opposed to like Zuckerberg trying to make it mass market and like literally doing a Super Bowl ad for the Quest. And, again, maybe only half the population can use that without throwing up, but yeah. So Apple is really well placed. They could go either way. I call it a mullet strategy. They have it's sort of business applications, real world applications in front, and then party in the back. You can go in Rec Room or you can play other games if you want. If for the VR fans.
I want to shift things a little bit because one of the things I think people don't realize is sort of in the real world applications of metaverse applications is actually helping people with disabilities.
Oh yeah.
And you write about this in your book, and I think that's really fascinating and something worth sort of exploring a little bit further, right? Like, can you share with us just how is the metaverse and I guess virtual reality, for lack of a better term, helping people with different afflictions?
Yeah, well, I start with the story of Fran. She was a senior citizen in California, and her daughter got into Second Life, and so she started playing with her daughter, and she has Parkinson's. So she had Parkinson's. She had really serious Parkinson's syndromes, where it was hard to move her body, and then she realized moving her avatar around in Second Life, and just the act of doing that, it kind of helped retrain her brain, is what researchers think, and it reduced symptoms of her Parkinson's. It actually improved her physical body, just because of this idea of being able to feel that you have control of this human avatar. And there's a researcher at UC Irvine, or who's studying this, believes that it could be just this retraining your brain. So that's already a very powerful use case, and that's for any virtual world that a metaverse platform is by definition as a virtual world. But that's one application I think really should be expanded on more. And so, yeah, I was very frustrated to see people just talking about kind of marketing and all that, where like, no, this could actually benefit senior citizens, for example. So not only that, with we need further research on like whether it does help consistently people with Parkinson's and so on, but also just create a social experience for people who, for one reason or another, are housebound, that they at least are able to socialize in an immersive sense, so they have a sense that are actually there. And so that's really powerful. And then I've seen that also, like I mentioned, with PTSD, people, military veterans with PTSD, and just being in a safe space where, they feel that they can communicate who they really are and the experiences they have, and they have the anonymity of an avatar. So, because it's very difficult from what I've read with people with PTSD to really discuss that out in the open. So there's these communities that have sprung up organically across multiple metaverse platforms of veterans of PTSD. So that's really exciting too, and it really needs to be explored. And that's on top of, we know the therapeutic aspects of VR, like a full VR experience, like for example, treat burn victims as it reduces their pain sensation. So yeah, there's a lot of applications that really should be explored a lot more for, I mean, if you want to call it, it could be a health tech applications. And I've seen it kind of as a health tech application as opposed to a full mass market consumer experience. But there's these, millions of people are in the hospital every year. So there is a large potential market.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So in the minutes we have left, I want to talk about the future of the metaverse. And in particular, there are two things that come to mind, one that are sort of newsy, actually, and they reflect, well, it's almost the same thing, but like Disney's invested 1.5 billion, I think, in Epic Games to build up, sort of use the Fortnite and I presume, the Unreal Engine to
Yeah.
build up a Disney universe.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's not Snow Crash, but Apple option is going to turn Neuromancer into a movie,
Oh
which
yeah.
is, or into a series or whatever it
Yeah.
is, right?
Apple
So
TV Plus. Yeah.
where do you see the metaverse headed? And let's just limit it to 5 years or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Because who knows what things will change.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the Disney Epic deal is really going to expand awareness. Really, it's going to tightly integrate all of Disney's IP, and that's basically, half the IP out there, Marvel and Star Wars and so on, with a metaverse platform. Like I mentioned, Tim Sweeney, that's always been his dream since the 90s, is to build the metaverse. And you're going to have, on top of the 100 million people that already play Fortnite, you're going to have people coming in because they want to play with various Disney IP in kind of a metaverse platform. So that is going to greatly expand the reach and also the awareness. And like you mentioned with Neuromancer, Avi Barziv, who I mentioned, he was with the early startup that was the one Neal Stephenson was working on building the metaverse in the 90s. But the startup, their name is Designing Worlds, and they were the ones who came up with the concept of spatial reality. And that's the same thing or spatial computing. Sorry, spatial
Yeah.
computing. That's in their PowerPoint from way back then. Um, and that's the term Apple is using, spatial computing. So they want to get away from saying VR or AR or the metaverse. And their whole idea is to say this is spatial computing, and they're kind of relaunching that as a term. Like I said, it's from the early 90s, but now they're relaunching it with the Vision Pro. So I find it interesting. Very soon after the Vision Pro came out, they announced that they're going to produce the series based on Neuromancer, which is alongside Snow Crash. Neuromancer is kind of that novel that introduced the idea of a virtual world. In Neuromancer, it's called cyberspace. So
Yeah.
I think it's a nice brand integration. So there's, Apple Vision Pro provides spatial computing, and then you can you can go into your Vision Pro and watch Neuromancer and see them explore cyberspace. So I think
I
I
didn't
would
even
not be
put that to,
surprised.
I didn't, honestly, I didn't even put that together, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
With, I didn't even connect the Apple Vision Pro and Neuromancer, and what the possibilities of that might be as a way to sort of, uh, prop each other up, right?
yeah,
Like, to
yeah.
your point.
To make it, yeah, like kind of elevate the brand. In other words, like like it's you got the ads around for the Vision Pro, but you want to add this kind of cultural cachet. So if you add, yeah, like Neuromancer as a TV show, yeah, it really enforces that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they'd go so far as to shoot it in spatial video or whatever, but man,
Yeah,
that would be crazy. James, this has been really great. Thank you so much. Again, Wagner James Au, he's the author of Making a Metaverse That Matters. If people want to find you online and follow your work, where should
yeah.
they go?
LinkedIn as W James Au, pretty easy to find. I have a blog called New World Notes, but LinkedIn's fine because I post the highlights from my blog, which the latest. Like I blogged about that Neuromancer show, so yeah, LinkedIn's a good place to start. And I'll be creating a OpenWater account soon. So
Yeah, that's what we like to hear. So people will be able to connect and learn from you there. Wagner James Au, author of Making a Metaverse That Matters and other books. You can buy it at Amazon and, lots of places online. James, thank you so much for being a part of this today. I really appreciate it.
hey, Chris, love talking with you. Great to reconnect.